2 weeks into school, Karen and a new friend, Colette, called and they wanted to go to a football game right after school. They had planned to walk away from school and go over to Colette's friend, an older man that lived not far from the school. And they were going to drink a few beers, smoke a few cigarettes, whatever they were going to do, party time, go to the game, and then we wouldn't be any wiser.
Stephen was, I don't know, he was probably 5'10", sandy blonde hair, and was clean cut. He's not one of those people that you meet and you're like, whoa, scumbag. You know, that's not the impression that you get. I had the one margarita and drank it really fast because I was like, it tastes like a slushie, you know. And then he'd gotten one for her and she gave that to me too. So I drank that down. I was like, those are really good. I'd just been drinking them and all of a sudden, like it literally kind of feels like you're going into a cloud. And you just kind of start feeling funny. I don't know, kind of not really spinning, but almost like you're sinking.
He had used a chemical called Rohypnol. It's commonly used in our valley and throughout the country to rape girls and boys. It's called the forget-me drug, and it literally renders the muscles incapacitated but leaves the brain alert. And then as it metabolizes out of the body, it flushes your short-term memory. Karen was alert, but couldn't move. And Colette walked out of the door telling her, have fun, little girl. And Stephen came over and started unbuttoning her blouse, and she tried to fight him off and couldn't move, but was conscious, knew everything going on, and eventually took her clothes off and raped her that day, repeatedly.
I woke up the next day, my dad was going to give me a lecture, and I just remember going to get in the shower. So just kind of sat in the shower and tried to stay in the bathroom for as long as I could.
You know, we did our discussions, and there she was going to get her punishment. I was going to have her clean her brother's toilet, which I thought was perfect, you know, because once he found out he didn't have to clean the toilet, he'd pee all over that thing. She wasn't going to date till she was 50, you know, and never ever go out again, all that stuff. And that morning I got up, had the coffee all ready, and she went into the bathroom to avoid that conversation, and I couldn't believe it. You know, drinking the night before, breaking all the rules. Now she knows we're supposed to have a talk, and the first thing she does is go in the bathroom and turn on the shower. Hot water running, and, you know, wouldn't come out to talk. And I was beating on the door. Karen, come out of there, it's time to talk, you'll shower later. And she wouldn't answer me. And she was in there moving around. I could hear her, and the shower was running. And I kept knocking on the door, Karen, come out of there. And she wouldn't do it. So I made the decision. I didn't care if she was 14. I didn't care if she was in the shower butt naked. I was going to go in there, turn the water off, wrap a towel around her. She could come sit, listen to her consequences, and would move on. I can remember reaching up and taking the pin. It was the pin I kept on the molding and sticking it in the hole. And I remember the click. As I opened the door, she was laying on the floor of the shower, and water was just washing away the pain she had suffered from the day before. And she had horrible bruises on her arms and chest. Stephen had bitten her breast. More importantly, she had horrible bruises on her inside of the thighs where he had forced her legs open, where she had tried to keep him from raping her.
To be able to lose mobility and to not be able to defend yourself, it's extremely traumatizing, I think, psychologically and mentally and emotionally, as well as physically. And then, like, you literally just kind of black out and come to, and so it's hard to understand everything that's really happening, you know. You just kind of see the scars afterwards, I guess. So.
Any type of sexual behavior or contact where consent is not freely given or obtained and is accomplished through force, intimidation, violence, coercion, manipulation, threat. Hold it right there for guys. Deception or abuse of authority. So that's what we're talking about. It's very important because it used to be that the word rape was used a lot, and it still is, but this is a larger legal, clinical definition. And it's important that as you look at your life or your spouse or people you know and love, that you understand what has happened and have the right language. We don't want to falsely accuse anyone. At the same time, we don't want to falsely excuse anyone. And it manifests itself in 3 ways. The acts can be physical, verbal, or psychological. In the age of bullying and the internet, in the age of certain inappropriate speech and conduct, it can be physical contact that connotates sexual assault, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It also can be verbal and or psychological. And some of you will ask, man, a whole sermon on this? Why is this necessary? I've been to a lot of churches and I've not heard them talk about this. I would say, I love them, but that's their failure. I was talking with a very well-known pastor of a decent-sized church, and he asked this question some years ago of me. He asked, why do you guys talk about sexual assault so much in your church? Well, part of it is, it's my wife's story. Part of it is, as you'll see in a moment, it's epidemic. I said, well, isn't it an issue in your church? And at the time, I think he had 800 people. He said, well, I know of 2 or 3 women who've been sexually assaulted, but it's not a big issue at our church. I said, you've not done your homework. You don't know your people. You are ignoring a problem and assuming there isn't one. That means you have a culture in which the people can't be honest about what has been happening to them and get the help that they need. I said, so it's not that you don't have a problem, it's that you're ignorant of a crisis. And really, that's the issue, that sexual assault is an epidemic. It's 1 in 4 women. How many women do you know? 1 in 4. Statistically, the younger they are, the more likely it is. It's also true for 1 in 6 men, and men are highly unlikely to report it for reasons of shame and embarrassment. And so it's not just women. 10 to 14% of wives are assaulted by their husbands, which means some women are not only victims, they're married to their abuser, which is a situation I would liken to torment. Abuse is what happens when something is done to you, but you escape. Torment is where it keeps happening to you and you're trapped. For some women, marriage is torment. They live with their abuser. And it wasn't actually until the 70s that the laws even began to recognize marital sexual assault, that it was even a crime for a man to abuse his wife. Assault is also more common in cohabitation than in marriage. And some of you say, that's why I don't want to get married, I just want to live with my boyfriend. A boyfriend is far more likely to sexually assault a girlfriend than a husband is to assault a wife. And here's the staggering statistic. Only 5 to 40% of cases are ever actually reported. Grace's would be an example. It's never been reported, not criminally speaking. So you look at the underreporting. Well, statistically, what that means is a large percentage of women and men who call Mars Hill Church home have been sexually assaulted. What that means is, if it's not part of your story, it is part of the story of someone you know. I mean, how many women do you know? How many men do you know? How many do you know closely and intimately and personally? Well, statistically, you know a lot of victims, and you probably don't know that they're victims because sometimes they don't have the language to understand what has happened to them, or the shame has caused them not to really talk about that. And so at Mars Hill Church, we want to be a place where it's safe for people to be honest about what has happened so that they can get hope and help and healing through Jesus and his people. Thanks for writing the chapter. I think you did a great job, and thanks for being my friend.
Thanks for walking through this whole process with me.
I would do anything for you. I would. Let's start with how did it feel for you, or what concerns or apprehensions did you have once, we kind of understood everything, and then you started working toward getting in a redemption group and talking with people and working that through? What was that like for you?
There was a lot of fears involved. I was always a very private, quiet person, and so when God started revealing and opening my eyes to some of the things that had happened to me, it was a big deal for me to even share it with you. And so the thought of continuing to share that with people for healing was pretty frightening. And just to not keep those things private, and to think that any healing could possibly come from more discussion was confusing to me. It seemed like you could just confess it or talk about it and then turn the page and you'd be fine, and that was it. But God had so much more healing to do in the process of working it through. So as I was entering into a group with other women, some who I knew, some who I didn't really know, it was a super vulnerable place for me. There were many times where I wanted to quit and say, this is too hard, and the fear of rejection from people was big for me. Just because of lots of relationships throughout my life, and so the thought of telling people this and then the rejection possibility that would happen. And so just sharing and getting in that group actually was a healing process, because as we each shared our story and things that had happened and different aspects, it made me realize that I wasn't alone. And I knew I wasn't, because I had the Lord and I had you, but there's just something, I think, for women specifically, but for all of us in general living in community, it really does help us want to be strengthened in that journey of healing.
What does it mean for you that we've got redemption groups at Mars Hill?
It means the world, because I know that people can really experience healing, and they don't have to be stuck in shame and the pain of being a sexual assault victim. They can help other people once they've been trained. It's a continual process for them. And so many people don't know what to say when they hear of sexual assault stories. And so this is an essential part for our church, to come in and love people who feel unloved. So it means the world to me that we could have such a resource, because so many people didn't know what to say to me either.
Yeah. What counsel would you give for a spouse, a friend, a parent who knows someone that this is part of their story, or somebody confides in them this part of their story? What would be helpful for them to say and do, and unhelpful for them to say and do?
Well, I think praying for them, being a good listener, being someone they can trust, a confidant, not someone who's going to go and spread what they've confided in you, just to remind them of God's love for them, to remind them of his desire for healing and renewal, and to cleanse from all unrighteousness. I needed to be reminded of those things regularly, because as new memories or lies try to invade during the healing process, the truth needs to be spoken, and not in just a aloof way or unfeeling way, but a way that is genuine, and even just hugging the person if they're okay with that, if it's someone that's, a girlfriend to another gal, or your wife. I think those are just important ways to really help that person see that you do care. And if they need help them into a redemption group, help them into a community that's trusting, or a biblical counselor if you're not in the Mars Hill community. Praying with them, praying over them, checking in on them to make sure that they're okay in the healing process. I had many friends that just regularly would text me or call and say, how can I pray for you today? What is your struggle today? And they would just pray for me right then. They would pray for me throughout the weeks. Just not rejecting me was huge. And then, just being good listeners.